This is very exciting. Hi, I'm Dale Peterson, and welcome to the Unsolicited Response Show. Now, normally we do this month in review show live, but we're recording this on November 1st because Liz and I are heading down to Miami South Beach to take a look at the new stages that we have for S4. We're going to do all the staging. It's getting pretty exciting right now. Last Friday, before the end of October, we sold our 300th ticket. I think we're at like 317 now, so it should be a great crowd there. Tickets 301 to 500 are on sale now, as well as the Autobahn training. And we're putting out a lot of information at s4xevents.com. So if you haven't checked it out, the agenda's all up. A lot of information about social events and other things. Just go to s4xevents.com and check it out. And hopefully we'll see some of you down in Miami South Beach. With that little commercial done, I'd like to bring on my first guest, or actually my only guest for this show, Clay Carter. He is the VP of Product Security with Xylem. And I thought you'd be a great one, Clay, to have on this month in review because we're going to talk water, and your site does water. In fact, the tagline I saw on your site was "Let's solve water." So welcome to the show, Clay.
Thanks, Dale. Happy to be here and excited to talk about water today.
Yeah, well, that'll be our first story. We'll hit a couple other things, so those of you who aren't in water might want to stick around. But let's start with water. So in October, one of the big things that happened was DHS's CISA put out a water and wastewater alert on October 14th, and then updated it again on October 25th, if I'm looking at my notes here. It covered probably the most interesting thing just from a sizzle standpoint was it covered 5 incidents from 2019 to 2021 in water. And then it listed some of the mitigations that they were recommending for the water and wastewater industry in general. So maybe if we take a big picture view of this, Clay, what is or what was the impact on the water and wastewater sector of an alert like this coming from DHS?
So anytime we're talking about cybersecurity in water and wastewater, I think it's a positive thing. And so that alone, right, the fact that a joint advisory was issued was a positive to create the dialogue and create the opportunity for dialogue. In terms of impact, you know, I think that the big challenges that we see are around accessibility, affordability, and resilience. And this really speaks to the resilience element. A lot of the information that's in the advisory is already pretty well known. The types of actors and the techniques that they're using, the fact that they're leveraging enterprise as the primary foothold into OT environments, those are things I think that most folks are familiar with if they're in water and are paying attention to the state of kind of cybersecurity in water. The fact that they're using MITRE ATT&CK was really great to see because it means we can all speak the same language and think about things in a similar way. The thing I really would have liked to see was the safety section get a little bit more prominence. I know why they laid it out the way that they did. It was kind of a what can you do right now? You know, what can you do as you're putting new systems in place? And what do you think about kind of if you're building new plants? But the safety thing I think can't be underemphasized because it just changes the equation if you've designed your system in a certain way. I think operators need to think about it from that lens first when they think about cybersecurity.
That's a really important point. It's actually when I was thinking about this topic, it came up, and I have it here in my notes. When I read this, and I included it in my Friday news and notes, I kind of shrugged it off because, as you said, it talked about things we know about it. It talked about, hey, spearphishing happens. Hey, they're taking advantage of unpatched or out-of-date software. I mean, that's hardly worth an alert, right? We all know this. I guess you need to put this out occasionally, and water and wastewater are a little bit behind electric, oil, and gas in terms of how long they've been working on this problem, with some exceptions. I know some water that's been working on it literally for 20 years. So some have been in it, but a large majority are just still getting up to speed. And then they had some mitigations that, again, were a laundry list of the normal good practice: two-factor authentication, segment your network, do all these things. I actually didn't get down to the good stuff. The good stuff was at the very bottom. I agree with you. It had, for example, having alternate control systems, including manual operations. And then it had a quote that I really liked: install independent cyber physical safety systems. These are systems that physically prevent dangerous conditions from occurring if the control system is compromised. So to me, that was the real meat of it, but you had to read all the way down through it.
Mhm.
Um, I guess, is that message getting across, or what do they need to do better to get that across to the water industry?
It's a really challenging thing. So, like, if you think about a big picture, there are over 50,000 water systems in the United States alone, and 90% of them are small water systems.
Mhm.
And what we've found as we've engaged with customers is that, cybersecurity maturity and size of your facility isn't necessarily always correlated. Certainly, it can be, right, in some of the
Mhm.
larger metropolitan areas, but it's not always the case. And so it comes down to community. It comes down to the communities that we live in. They're all unique and distinct. How their water needs are solved are unique and distinct based on where they're located in the world. Um, and the groups that seem to be most successful have dedicated people that have been spending years and years of their lives trying to make it the most hardened and cyber secure facility possible. And so it comes down to people. And how do we enable those people to live, and to do that work within their communities. You're not going to solve it, at some big grand level. You have to do it. It's local. Everything is local. It's hyper local when it comes to water in pretty much most cases.
I want to pull on that thread a little bit, but let's just stay on this one issue where, at least I will. You can talk about it whatever you want to talk about, of course, Clay. But for me, this, what you said at the beginning, is such a lesson for, I think, CISA and EPA when they get more involved, and everyone else. It's not terribly helpful to put out alerts with a long laundry list of things to do. Essentially, here's a good practice security program. You need to do all these sorts of things. Now, it wasn't quite that detailed, but some of them have been. That,
Mhm.
and I think I recommended this at early in the year, that they really need to take a message out. Say, this is water industry. This is what you should be doing. So, for example, two-factor authentication. Have a message on two-factor authentication, and also not have 10 messages all in the same quarter, because they just can't absorb that much, especially some of the smaller ones that you talked about.
Mhm.
Um, to me, the fact that, someone who follows the industry, and maybe I was too lazy not to read all the way to the bottom, but I got about halfway through and I'm like, oh, this is a nothing burger again. This is not wrong, just not terribly helpful. Same information was everywhere else. To me, I think CISA should really look at this and say, what can we do to be more effective in reaching our target audience? Um, what you mentioned, though, on the 50,000, was that the number 50,000?
Mhm. That's right,
About
in the
that.
U.S.
I'm wondering on the smaller ones. So the variant size, a lot of them are smaller systems. Is this safety or manual operations more applicable to them, or let's say more achievable by them? Because the few that I've seen of that size, they don't typically hire people like me, the small guys, uh, but they don't have as much automation. The possibility of them running things manually or dealing with a cyber outage, if they've planned it ahead of time, oftentimes is more practical than in a large system where they've automated so much that it's difficult to run all of it without the automation. Is that carry over for a lot of the people, or is that just the handful that I saw were that way?
So what I've found is that most of these systems are pretty unique, and so it really does depend. And I think the biggest component I would offer is the workforce. It's a huge trend that we see in terms of resilience of these different systems. Is their workforce is starting to turn over, and
Hmm.
it's a real challenge to find experienced water and wastewater operators that are qualified to be in these facilities and to be in 50,000 places across the U.S. alone, let alone right globally. And so I think they're going to have to lean more on digital. I think that's the only way,
Hmm.
because the talent to support these facilities just needs that remote enablement to be able to do more with fewer people. That's the only way I think they're going to solve it, and I think that's going to take edge to cloud type designs but that, to your point, enforce local control. You have to enforce local control, but still enable the cloud and other environments to bring optimization recommendations, be able to bring the operator to the equipment rather than have to roll trucks.
Hmm. So maybe it was what I said was more applicable 10, 20 years ago and is becoming less true every year, is what you're seeing, is that this idea of people that knew how to run the plant and could run it with or without a lot of the control system being available is going away, is what I heard.
I think it's going to be a challenge to run less digital systems at scale for countries like the United States
Hmm.
and for countries around the world. There's too many systems, there's too few expert operators to be able to do it without technology. And that certainly creates trade offs. And so we have to understand the trade offs and kind of lean into what those trade offs are, which I think goes down to having enforcement of local control and being prepared to send people to sites when you have to. But I think that we're going to end up in a place where you've got to rely on the digital technology to run the facilities, to run the operations.
Hmm. But then there's the safety side of it as well, right? So you could essentially maybe need the digital to run it, but you could also prevent, let's say, the delivery of bad water, dangerous water, or the spillage of wastewater, even if the system was attacked and compromised through or through safety systems that were unhackable, or through things like manual checks. Periodically, once a day, someone checks something, and that way, the nice thing about water, I guess, I was lucky. The first uh, ICS asset owner I ever encountered was water, and water moves a lot slower than electricity. So
It's true.
it doesn't have that thing where something can go wrong in a second. I guess certain equipment could break quickly, but the actual water being delivered to a customer doesn't just immediately get hacked and then cause people to die. There's a time frame in there and a lot of things that happen in between those two that the industry really can leverage if they think out the scenarios, right?
I think you're totally right there. I think physics is an advantage, and because water follows the laws of physics just like electrons and electricity do, we have that in our favor, right there. It's a multi-step process. Wastewater networks, drinking water networks follow a very predictable path. They have to, and
Hmm.
there's multiple stages along the way, which gives you the opportunity for intervention. It gives you the opportunity to think through, kind of what decisions you need to make at which point and where your levers are, in the event of some kind of unexpected cyber attack or something like that.
Now, on the wastewater side, I guess I don't have as much visibility there on the process. I've been in some plants, but I don't know how fast things can go wrong. Can a spillage happen quickly if something goes wrong, as opposed to like water delivery that would take some time to deliver dangerous water?
Yeah, it's all relative, relative to the size of the facility, the size of the actual effluent pipes that you're using, right, and what you're actually capable of pushing out. Um, in general, right? I mean, we do see things, right, where spillages happen, and they can be significant, and they can happen relatively quickly.
Hmm.
I think it's just a matter of understanding it. Go back to AWEA, right? There's a reason AWEA is in place. Those risk and resilience assessments is to understand kind of what your output can be as a wastewater treatment operator, and what the impact is to the surrounding community, and then what you need to do about it. What do you
Hmm.
need to do to be prepared for that? How do you know as soon as possible? What are your leading indicators? What are your lagging indicators? And how do you turn that into a comprehensive safety plan? Um, I will totally admit I'm not a hydro engineer, but I do study the networks and the process just to understand kind of
Hmm.
where we have our levers and intervention opportunities.
Yeah. And I really thought that, flipping back to water, I always thought that that was, well, first of all, I'm not sure why Oldsmar had the press conference, but but if you felt obligated to have a press conference like that, I thought that they, with some preparation, could have had a much better conference if they were, or a press conference if they were in a position to talk about the checks. They broadly mentioned, hey, we had some checks and this wouldn't have happened, but it didn't really sound credible. It just sounded like, don't worry, we got this. If they would have actually said, we have a system that, is not connected, that was unhackable, that would have detected this. We have people that are measuring this, daily. It would have taken 3 days. They would have found this, and they could have given a great deal of confidence that even if their system had been completely owned, if this operator had not found it, they still would not have delivered dangerous drinking water. And it's almost, when you look at risk management, one of the categories is reputational risk. I think some of the water utilities, if they think through these safety controls and then actually work through an incident response where they have to talk to the community, the media, the regulators and such, they're in a position much better than a lot of the other sectors we see in ICS at being able to have a credible statement as to why a really bad thing can't happen if they've planned it out. I guess feel free to comment on that, but if you don't have any comment on that, I guess I'd ask you one last question on this. I give CISA a lot of unsolicited advice as to what they should do. How could CISA, EPA, or any other government agency help the water wastewater industry? What would be a big plus, rather than have me criticize them? How could they help?
Sure. And to your last comment, right? I do
Sure.
think that not enough is said about how safe these systems are intentionally by design and the work that goes into
Hmm.
that. And I think it's a thing that, we incorporate heavily into how we make products and how we think about the consequences. And so there just needs to be more said about that, I think, in general, to be clear about what the real potential consequences are, right? Consequence informed kind of cyber engineering, to quote the INL guys.
Well,
It's,
before you answer
yeah,
my question, I'll interrupt you
sure.
here. I,
Yeah.
I think the key is, and this is a key because I know we have a lot of OT people on here like you and I that are not engineers. So we have to rely on our discussions with engineers. And a lot of times they will tell us, oh, this really bad thing can't happen because we have this in place. I think our job then is to push back and say, okay, how is that in place? For example, I've seen a lot of cases where in manufacturing where people have interlocks and PLCs that prevent a really bad thing from happening. But if the attacker is in the network and can reprogram the PLC, that's not effective against a cyber attack. Whereas and I'm sure that's true in water, there's some that are effective and some that aren't effective. So that's where we, as the OT professionals, we can't engineer the system, we can't evaluate the safety system, but we can say, could a cyber attack change this safety or protection measure that you have in place?
It's a great point. I think as at like a system level, or as a systems engineer myself, it's about your assumptions. What assumptions are you making, and under what
Hmm.
conditions, and at what point are those assumptions no longer valid? And I think that's the nature of kind of what you're describing. Is, well, if you're assuming that someone can't reprogram your PLC, then that's an assumption you should probably challenge.
Yep.
So I think you're totally right. That's where listening, but also helping bring a different perspective to how
Hmm.
our systems are designed, is what makes us such a valuable ally. But also, to your point, the symbiotic nature of our work with engineers, with designers, with the folks that do operations.
Okay, now the question. So how could the
Yeah.
government help?
It's a fantastic question. I think there's a couple of really big opportunities, and if not now, when, right?
Hmm.
Awareness in this sector, water and wastewater, has never been higher. Thanks in part, right, to that press conference. So really appreciate the visibility and awareness that moment created,
Hmm.
for many people. Not to mention, right, the other incidents that have been disclosed over time. This is a sector that doesn't talk about things like that in general, and so I think a lot of positive and a lot of moment creation that's kind of happened. Um, the first thing I think is a need for more community. I see, again, it's all local. Everything in water is local, and because of that, I think there tend to be battles that are being fought alone or on multiple fronts, when maybe those are battles that could be fought as a community, and with a larger, more powerful voice as a collective, series of asset owners and operators. And Xylem is an operator in some capacities as well. So we have a perspective on that, as well. So that's a big one. I think the other thing is, um, more uh, more alignment, more consultation, more dialogue with industry. And I think that there tends to be. I think I heard Joel talking about this on one of your last shows. There's a knee-jerk reaction, a need to get content out. We live in an age of content being king, and I totally recognize that. And there's a desire, I think, to see entities put out guidance in response to events. Totally recognize that. I think we have to work together faster to put out more high quality content that serves the needs of the operator community. And it really needs to start with those most at risk, but also speak to those 50,000 small water systems across the United States and globally. This is not just a United States problem. This is a global problem. You could transplant it to any country in the world, and you're going to have similar dialogue with similar dynamics that are in play. And so I think that consultation, I think everybody likes to ask for government consultation with industry, but this is a place where I think it really, really matters because there are unique things about water. There's a reason that water is the way that it is. It's because economics are a huge part of that. It costs $3 to take a ton of water to your house and remove a ton of wastewater from your house. Like, the economics are completely different than in other critical infrastructure. And so the only way to kind of make these things practical and actually useful to utilities is to consult with them, to consult with industry, to consult with the folks that are in these plants day in and day out. It can't be something that's done from the sidelines. So those are my big two.
I hear you, and I'm not going to disagree with you, but I'm going to maybe challenge you a little bit. How is that different than what I've been hearing for the last 15 years? Um, I get you that we have more awareness now because of Oldsmar and some of these other less publicized incident. Even Colonial Pipeline, I think, has a spillover effect to help other sectors. But we've been hearing this. We need better communication. We need, information sharing, awareness. Uh, what do you expect, in a world where they were successful? What would that look like?
So I think the big thing that's different for me now, right, to your question, right, just even relative to 2 years ago, when I
Mhm.
first arrived at Xylem, it's recognition that now is the time, and this is the moment when what the choices that we make now have significant impact on multiple fronts, and
Mhm.
the circumstances have kind of aligned. The stars have aligned to create an environment where the water community, the water operator community, is ready for this kind of
Mhm.
change. They're starting to see it. It's penetrating their consciousness. It's becoming a thing that they have to confront at the same time as they have to confront their workforce and their aging infrastructure and the demands of their consumer base who's seeing a more digital experience in their personal lives. The timing is right to do something about it and to do something right. And the only way to do that is together. With the product makers like
Yeah.
Xylem, with integrators, with asset owners, operators, you know better than I, right? The need for a team sport to approach this and to do that in consultation and collaboration with government. The last thing we need is regulation and things that create an affordability problem or that aren't practical to be implemented. It's a burden that the water community I don't think can afford.
Certainly timing is important in these things. So I think that's a valid statement that the efforts that have been less than successful or less than totally successful, there's some small wins, but I don't think there's been a lot of big wins in
Mm.
these joint programs in the water sector. Maybe the programs were perfect or close to what was needed, but the timing wasn't right. So that is entirely possible. Okay. Well, I really appreciate your perspective on the water industry. We're going to go on to two other stories for the month, not specifically water related, although they do play a little bit there. Uh, Probably the big one, and we don't need to spend too much time on this, but there's a big boom in the industry, and this not the dangerous boom, but the happy boom that Dragos raised $200 million in a Series D, and I thought more impressive even than that large number, because we've had some $100 million raises, was the fact that they were the first ones to publish their valuation. Their post-money valuation was 1.7 billion with a B. So they are the official first unicorn in our sector, in the OT security sector. Uh, what did you think when you heard that? What was your gut reaction of hearing that we've got a unicorn in this sector now?
It was awesome. I'm really thrilled for Rob and the entire team at Dragos. I believe that they're the best in the world at what they do, and so I'm thrilled for them. Xylem's actually a partner of Dragos. We're
Mm.
focused on protecting our products, and building the right security into the things that we make. And Dragos brings unmatched experience in critical infrastructure response and some fantastic technology to augment that. And so we're huge fans of what Rob and team are doing. Something that Rob said in one of the interviews, that if my son is going to have lights and water when he grows up, this is why Dragos exists. This is why Dragos needs to stay on the path that they're on. That spoke to me in a really personal way because I think about that with my own family. And so just really, really happy for them and all the things they're doing. Like I said, I think they're the best in the world.
Would you care to make a guess or a prediction? This is in the prediction section, but Bill Ackerman, he was a VC. He still is a VC and angel investor. I had him on an interview maybe a year ago at Hack the Capital. He predicted there would be multi-billion dollar OT security companies in the next, 3 to 5 years. Do you think we're going to see other unicorns, or is this a one-off or a two-off?
I certainly think it's possible. I think that in general, there is just a recognition now that what moves, powers, and takes care of the world, it's OT. It's cyber physical systems, and there's tremendous opportunity to continue to improve the cybersecurity of those systems. So I think it's certainly there. I think the perspective I'd bring from water is that I would just urge caution that not every facility operator can afford expensive technology. And so that's going to be, to me, that might be the top end of it. Is there's only so many opportunities, to provide this technology in these systems, and at a price point that maybe limits your market capture. And so I think that's a factor that is maybe unexplored.
That could change a little bit, not so much the fact that they can spend a lot of money, but when you start to look at more and more of this moving to the cloud, being run by a third party and that, then all of a sudden you can get a small slice of that recurring revenue potentially, but that's a different business model than what they've traditionally worked with. That'll be interesting. Yeah, I did have a chance to talk to Rob a little bit before the announcement, and it was interesting. He said they weren't looking for money, that the money came to them, that, and it was at a number, obviously a very big number. They did quite well, that they couldn't say no to, and having BlackRock involved. So it was one of these things almost like the venture market saying, hey, we want in. What do we have to pay to get in? Which is a little bit new. We've seen a lot of money in the early rounds, in the small rounds. Even in October, Gravwell raised, I think it was, I wrote it down, 3 million. Adolis raised 2.5 million. Congratulations to both those companies. But there's been that availability, and I think that availability is still strong. What is a little different here is you get different players like BlackRock, like Koch Industries, like others that say, I want to be in a big way. It doesn't really, they're not terribly interested in investing $1 million in something. It's not worth their time. So I think that was a big shift in the industry. And I guess one of the things I actually told Rob, I asked him when he was going to stop teaching SANS classes. Now that he's a $1.7 billion company, he claims he still says, no. They, as long as they keep meeting their marks, he's going to keep doing what he's doing. So it's hard to argue against the success, but I do think that I'll be watching closely to see what changes in the leadership there. I mean, it's just a much bigger operation. You need to bring in not just additional hundreds of people, but you need to bring in some real top leadership talent to augment the existing staff. Not a knock on the existing team, but it's a different game now. So either all those people have to up their game, or they have to bring in some people who can help them do that. I see you want to say something on that.
It's going to be really interesting to watch. The thing for me is the global expansion that they're undertaking. I'm really excited to see it. I think there's parts of the world that really need the services Dragos can provide, and so I think that expansion and to bring the consistent mission and values that Rob has instilled in that organization around the world in every engagement with every asset owner and operator. That's a tall order, but I think they're up to it. That's the thing I'm going to watch with the most interest.
It will be interesting, though, to see if it really makes a difference in terms of, they raised 100 million about a year ago. Clarity's raised 100 million plus. Drago or Nozomi raised 100 million plus. Can you really spend 300 million much faster than you can spend 100 million? I get the sense in talking to Rob that money was not the barrier to what they were doing. They were running as fast as they thought was practical. They obviously want to run fast, but if you run too fast, you actually do more harm than good. But they were going as fast as they thought they could. I don't know this is going to allow them to go any faster. But it's certainly when you can get cash. I read a book about Amazon, and Amazon raised a bunch of money before the .com bubble burst. Not that this is the same thing, but having that money in the bank in case something goes bad is never a bad thing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, where that takes me sitting on cash is either a rainy day or acquisition. And that would be interesting as well. I mean, that's one way to grow faster, certainly, but it comes with a different set of challenges. And again, I think their mission and values are the heart and soul of that company and what has made their success. So how do you sustain that? And through an acquisition strategy, that would be an interesting thing to try to sustain.
Acquisitions. Yes, that's a different market now, isn't it? Where these companies can start to make non-small acquisitions. I guess they always could have acquired, and maybe some have. I can't remember a company for $1 million or $2 million. But you have that much money, and when you acquire a company, you also acquire assets, so it doesn't necessarily decrease your value. But you could acquire a $40 million company or more with what they have. Okay. And then I had one last comment on this, unrelated to Dragos or Nozomi or Clarity, but to me, this is more bad news for the small players. Your skate offenses, your Rataflows, your Otarios. I think you're going to see some of these people have a bit of trouble over the next 6 months. And I maybe just jump my prediction a little bit. I'd actually make a prediction here that I think you're going to see at least 2 of the players get acquired in the next 6 months. It's good and bad news for them. The bad news is it's meaning it's going to be really hard for them to be competitive in the long run with going up against companies of that size. Not that you'd have to go out of business, but you're just going to be a tiny bit player compared to those, unless you can raise the capital. But there might be some big players that want to get into the business, and they might acquire them. The acquisitions that Cisco did and Microsoft and Tenable and maybe even Forescout are looking pretty good right now, because now they have the resources to play in this program. There might be some big players that said, I want in. So it might be a good time for them to be acquired, but it's probably not a good time for them to stand alone for another 6 to 12 months. And you might even see people like Verve and Industrial Defender and people that aren't directly competitors to Dragos and Clarity and Nozomi. You might see them get some interest too. So I would say that one prediction would be that this is going to increase the acquisition market in the next 6 months.
I could see it. I think the quality of your product tends to speak. And so if you have a quality product that delivers value, then you'll continue to see success in some portion of the market. And if you have a quality product, it also will attract those that are interested in acquiring. And so I do think that there's truth to what you're saying.
Well, okay, I'm going to disagree with you here. It's always fun to disagree a little. I'm not sure a quality product always leads to success, because even in this marketplace, there were some products that were just as good as those 3 that they just couldn't execute. And if I'm an asset owner looking at buying one of these products, I have to look at the sustainability of the company. And if it's a company with tens of millions of dollars in resources versus ones with hundreds of millions of dollars of resources, that product not just has to be as good, it's got to be so much better for me to consider it, because why would I take the company risk? So anyways, you don't have to comment on that.
I don't think we're disagreeing at all, but because I agree, execution is everything. Great ideas, great products are one thing, but if you don't execute, what's the point?
Yeah. Okay, let's go to the third story. Showdan Trends. Showdan, the search engine that looks for things that are on the internet, including ICS, has been finding internet connected ICS for years and years now, so many of them. But they came out with a new feature. John did. Now they have what he calls Showdan Trends. And you used to be able to do this, but you had to do it yourself. You basically could run a script that would say, tell me, if I'm a company, I could say, here's my IP address range. Tell me over time how many internet accessible things I have and on what ports are internet accessible. Now you can actually run a query and they will provide that. So you could say, for example, how much Ethernet IP do I have exposed in this address range? Or a government or a region could do that. You know, the U.S. government could do a scan across all U.S. IP addresses and say how much of this protocol is out there and has that gone up or down over time. And he gave a good example in his press release, which we'll link in the show notes, of how Modbus had a spike, interestingly, right around the Colonial Pipeline time, where Modbus on a non-standard port, on port 503 instead of 502, went up by 250% right about the time Colonial Pipeline happened. So Showdan can find things like that. How do you think something like Showdan Trends should be used in the ICS community?
Yeah, it's a fantastic tool. I really like Shodan. Several folks on my team are account holders. We've been using it. It reminds me, or the new feature reminds me of using Splunk in a prior life, or it even reminds me in a consumer lens of like the Wayback Machine. And so the idea of seeing historical changes in edge visibility, mapping those views as a product maker, mapping those views to things like plant build outs, new equipment commissioning, major product launches, and watching those things over time because they are cyclical, they are seasonal, there's things of that nature in them. I think there's a lot of potential there. And I think that you can add a lot of value to what the asset owner and operator community needs by having something like that available to show them, hey, this system is now on the internet, or it was on the internet and now it's not, or we've seen this drift in your configuration over time. I think that's really valuable, and so I'm excited to try it.
We have seen, and I'm sure you have as well, contractors sometimes will come in well-meaning, or even employees that want to work on a project at night. They'll create a remote access into the ICS, or they will set up something. A lot, especially I'd say the smaller contractors will set up something so that they can manage and monitor the service or provide remote support, all with the best of intentions, but they've created back doors and holes. So it's always been something that a company should consider, is how are they monitoring that over time. I'm almost wondering with something like this, though, if this is something that governments can use for metrics. I've sometimes questioned the value of trying to get all these control systems off of the internet as a government role, because the government really has to prioritize their work. They can't care. You mentioned 50,000 water systems. They can provide general guidance to 50,000. They can't really provide boots on the ground and connections with all 50,000 practically. To me, I think that'd be a bad expenditure of money. They might want to pick the top 1,000 or 2,000 and focus on those. But they could, if they chose, they could have some search criteria and follow the trends. And one of their metrics could be the amount of internet exposed ICS. I mean, that would be something very easy for the government to track. And they claim that it's a problem and they're dealing with it. Now they have an easy metric with Showdan Trends.
I think there's definitely potential there, and what I would love to see is to use a mechanism like that, and potentially with the sponsorship of governments, to create more of a self-regulation and self-governance mechanism in water. Because, like you said, you can't get to all 50,000 facilities, without going quite down the full path of a NERC-like organization. I think the folks at AWWA, Kevin Morley, and the ideas that he's putting out into the space, I think it could create an interesting space where could something like this be a catalyst to drive water systems to collaborate and communicate about the systems that they have out there. The way that water systems operators think about watersheds today is they rely on each other to know, what are you seeing upstream in the Chesapeake Bay, and how is that going to affect me downstream
Mm.
in the James River, and how's that going to affect me even further downstream, in one of the tributaries. So I think that there is, models for that work today in water, and it'd be very interesting to see how data like this about kind of the risk that the water systems might be taking, knowing or unknowingly, that might be a thing that they could somehow self-regulate and self-govern. I think that'd be a fascinating thing to explore.
I like that. Good job, John. That's a nice feature too. So Shodan just keeps on delivering. I'm really been impressed with them from day one. Let's get to our predictions, wins, and fails. Since I already gave my prediction that we're going to see more acquisitions in the smaller players in the OT visibility and detection space because of this Dragos raise, do you have a prediction for us, Clay?
Yeah, and I think it's really driven by what we're seeing with global supply chain issues, and that is more agility from product makers. Um, More agile, more value to market faster, more flexible bills and materials, more firmware that's designed for reuse across chipsets, really having to engineer out of some of the lock-in and some of the supply chain issues that have hit us kind of front and center that are affecting all industries and all verticals. And so I think you're going to see a really significant shift over the next 12 months from the product maker space to adapt to this. And I think it's going to lead to just better quality product in general going forward.
So how would we know if that happens?
Sure. I think you're going to start to see it emerge based on the kinds of things that show up in the marketplace, and as portfolios and capabilities start to shift, and then frankly, as things like SBOM become more required and are forced to be delivered, I think rightly so, that you're going to start to see that come through, and you're going to see that those things are changing and they're becoming more consistent and more repeatable, and are more flexible, not locked in on individual chipsets or things like that are hard to procure.
Okay, great. We'll look for that. What's your win for the month?
Total credit to Microsoft and their pledge to train 250,000 folks across the U.S. in cybersecurity. I love the idea of using the community college system. So total credit to them. Obviously, execution is key there, but love the idea and love the commitment that they're kind of putting actions towards.
And they have a good track record of meeting these big program objectives. Sometimes delays, but as in any large objective, but they do tend to knock a lot of these out. That's a good one. Yeah, I think that's a huge win. For me, wins this month, obviously Dragos was a win. We talked about that. I thought that Thomas Ridd being named to lead a program on cybersecurity and statecraft at Johns Hopkins is a real win. He's really one of the big thinkers in that kind of intersection of cyber and international relations and statecraft and such. But the one I settled on was Clarity found some vulnerabilities in a Honeywell controllers, and in some cases they were really just proving insecure by design, a lack of authentication to do certain things. The win is Honeywell. They actually responded by adding digital signatures to what they call their CCL, which is essentially their program or their logic that they load into their controllers. So they now, with their current models, you can digitally sign things before they're loaded, and then the controller will actually verify that it is a signed CCL or signed program, signed logic before installing it and using it. And it's a simple thing, but it hasn't been there for decades. So to me, credit to Honeywell to responding to this issue with clarity and actually changing it and making it better and helping us get past insecure by design.
Yeah,
How about your
awesome.
fail?
So my fail is I'm a believer that Cybersecurity Awareness Month is really overdone, and sometimes it amounts to shouting in the wind. And so I think that, again, we mentioned earlier, right? Content is king. So there's a rush to push content in October, and I think it just creates a numbing effect in some cases. And so I wish Cybersecurity Awareness Month was every month, but I wish that the message was more practical and useful for the folks that are actually serving our communities. And so that's my fail. Every October, Like, here we go again. It's Awareness Month, and while it does create an opportunity, I think that we could take better advantage of it.
That is an excellent fail. I think you're voicing something that a lot in the community are feeling right now. Just the overwhelm of information. And that's a tough thing. I don't know what the solution is, but I certainly think making every month cybersecurity month, that's just saying always worry about cybersecurity.
Right.
I do think, and so it's funny, a lot of the materials I saw were really good, but it's a little bit like putting out something at Black Hat or during RSA. There's just so much that you can't absorb it that it's maybe not the most efficient time to put out a message you really care about, unless you're one of the leaders. So I think, for example, the CISA stuff, some of the large stuff that they did got some visibility. But, every vendor putting out things, multiple things every week. Yeah, I agree with you. That's a good fail.
Signal, noise, and amplitude. That's what that means to me.
See, he is an engineer.
All the way to the core.
My fail, unfortunately, TSA gets my fail 2 months in a row. I skewered their pipeline requirements documents especially the second one, when that came out. And I guess I was just crushed when I heard the announcement that they're going to also come out with sets of requirements for rail and airports. Not that requirements are bad, but they've got to do a better job. I mean, you didn't make these comments, but when you were talking about some of the things with water, about how we need to be really careful about what we ask them to do because of limited bandwidth and such, I really see that, especially now rail and airport are going to be taking on new responsibilities. We got to be really careful about what we tell them is priority 1, priority 2, priority 3. We can't just throw a bunch of stuff and say, do this, especially if it's not going to move the needle like a lot of those requirements were. So hopefully we'll be able to give them a win. Maybe they'll rethink. Maybe they'll look at the CSF or something else and come up with a better set of requirements. But just the idea of, hey, we did such a good job with these pipeline requirements, we're now going to do them for rail and airport. I just really hope that some in the community can get the message that those weren't good. There's been a few voices, but it's I guess a little dangerous to tell government that what they did was really bad, at least out loud. Hopefully behind the scenes it's going on.
It feels like starting with reporting is a pretty safe thing to do, and then use that as a mechanism to drive better guidance. If reporting is the challenge, certainly in water, reporting is a huge challenge. And I believe it's probably a challenge in many other verticals as well. And so that feels like a safe place to start, but then use that to drive better guidance and better action.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, I think I had a bigger problem with the second one where they had a set of requirements that leaked out through, I think it was the Wall Street Journal leaked those out. That's where the real problem was. But even on reporting, what are you going to do with it? Okay, government, we report it to you. Now what are you going to do? Does that mean you're going to come in and you're going to ask us a ton of questions while we're trying to deal with this thing? I mean, it should be actionable reporting. So if we report it to you, what action are you going to take? If this is just informing, I know it's going to happen. I know this is one you're not going to fight. So, and I think it's not a big deal, but I'm not sure we're really moving the needle a ton by saying, oh, we have to inform the government. Have we reduced our risk by saying, oh, we're informing the government within 24, 48, 72 hours? I'm not sure we've really accomplished much.
I agree. It's all about curation and value creation, right? You have to provide something back to the community. This is what we saw. This is what caused it. This is the behavior we'd encourage. This is the trends. I think I do hear those things from CISA, right? That I do believe that they are in the business of creating value. I think it's about continuing to do so, and it's about using maybe what could come from some of these new emerging things to create that value and to create it for the folks that actually run the equipment.
The hardest thing for any I think any of these organizations, CISA included, is trying to fight the urge to do things that fall under good practice. You have to really focus on what is going to make a big difference. And yes, it's not going to include a lot of things that people are saying, well, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? It's the same with looking at water. Why aren't you looking at all 50,000 water? well, I can't really look hard at all 50,000. Should I do a little bit on all of them, or should I really focus where the risk is? It's a tough thing to try to convince the executive branch and Congress, if you're in that role, that, hey, we're going to leave a lot of things out, but we're going to focus on what's important. I think that's hard to tell. Clay, I really appreciate you being on the show here. Where can people find you? What's the best place? Boy, my mouth is not working today. What's the best place to reach out to you if they want to? Is it LinkedIn? Is it Twitter? Where do you hang out?
Sure, yeah, probably LinkedIn is the easiest place to find me. I haven't been active on Twitter in a while. Kind of escaped from the echo chamber. But yeah, LinkedIn is great. Xylem.com/security if you're looking for our content, everything that we put out for our customers. Yeah, that would be the best place to find me.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Clay.
Thank you, Dale. Thanks for having me.